Welcome everyone to the last session of this series. We're live today with YSEALI Bootcamp 2021, Sparking Digital Conversations. And today we have a very special guest with us here from the city of Middleton. And just to get everybody warmed up, what we'll do is a quick question to get the minds and keyboards going. So if you would please go over to Menti and enter in the code 77454611. It will be in the chat as well. Go in over there and share with us, what do you think civic engagement means to you? Yeah, really excited to see your understanding of what civic engagement means before we get started with our speaker today. Right. If any of you are facing difficulties, feel free to let us know in the chat. Hi, JP. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Morning. Right. You guys have access to Menti. That's all okay. All right. Awesome. Empowerment, advocacy. Anybody else have any thoughts? We'll give you 30 seconds more before we move on. Controversy, interesting. Would be interested to hear more about why you think that is. Cultural understanding, yep. Community capacity building, right. Representation. Accountability. Right, very interesting. All right, I guess we can move on. And thank you so much for answering all of this. I guess, oh, there's still some coming in. All right. Thank you everyone for your thoughts. Yeah, so civic engagement does encompass some of those things and most of those things that you have shared. And the main idea is to make a difference in civic life in one's community, and also to develop the combination of knowledge, skills, values, and motivation to make that difference, right? It also does mean promoting the quality of life in a community through both political and non-political processes. So yeah, I'm excited to see what you guys can draw parallels to in today's conversation that we're going to have. And we're going to take a journey today, right? We're going to talk to the city administrator for the city of Middleton. And where is Middleton? It's right there in Wisconsin. And to take us on that journey, we have one of our favorite guys, Mr. Rusydie. And Rusydie is the co-founder and director of HAUS KCH, Kuching's first grassroots initiated empowered creative community hub. Rusydie's experience in the creative industry started with participating and organizing community events for his local skateboarding scene. And these early years of creative facilitation has helped manifest his larger vision for his hometown's creative industry by including social innovation and accessibility into the arts through HAUS KCH. So over to you, Rusydie, to guide us through today's session.
Thank you for that, Navin. Good morning, everybody. Rusydie here from HAUS. Thank you very much, Navin, for the introduction. And thank you again to America and BGBG for including HAUS and their webinars and promoting the bootcamp and as participants to this larger vision that we have for change makers in East Malaysia, namely Sabah and Sarawak. Today we will be talking about civic engagement. And personally, when the subject comes up to me, it means going down to the ground and seeing what needs to be engaged in. We're talking about conversations between authoritative bodies and communities, and those conversations in resulting in change. Today we have with us a speaker from the US. His name is Mike. I'll introduce him in a bit. Mike will be talking about various levels of engagement, as well as through different means and over different arenas, actually. I'll be very interested to hear a little bit about all of that. But how this today's session will run is that we will have 4 main topics, and we'll give Mike about 10 minutes each to present them, and then it will be followed by 5 minutes of question and answering. So in order to not interrupt anything, but I'll keep my personal opinions to the very end if we have time. Please leave your questions in the comments section if you guys have any questions to ask. Nothing is silly. Don't feel shy to ask questions. We love questions in this part. But yes, let me introduce Mike. Mike is an experienced city administrator at the city of Middleton, and he has a demonstrated history within the administration industry. Mike has served as the Chief Administrative Officer for Progressive and Dynamic Municipality. CNN recognized Middleton as the best place to live in 2007. It was ranked number 7 in 2005, number 4 in 2009, number 8 in 2011. And this includes over 20,000 contiguous to the west side of Madison. In his job, Mike oversees 12 departments and 192 regular full and part-time employees, providing a vast array of community services. His additional hats are personal officer, public information officer, and such. He's also led the All-America City Finalist Delegation in 2010. But besides this, Mike is also professionally skilled in collective bargaining, grassroots organizing, urban planning, government, and coalitions. Mike, I hope I did you justice there. If there's anything that I did not explain correctly, please feel free to rectify me. How are you doing today?
You did very well. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. Evening here, morning in Malaysia.
Yes. I'm glad to hear that you're doing well, Mike. Floor is yours. Please take it away. Thanks for being.
And I have my Malaysian flag that was given to me by one of our 2 visitors from Malaysia who we hosted from Waisili, Woon Sung Ung and Ambika Sanggaran have both been here for visits to the Waisili program. And it really helps make the world a smaller place to have that kind of exchange internationally. And I grew so much in respect for the kind of work that you are doing in Malaysia. And so thank you all. I wanted to, as a bit of context, I know Navin was sharing where Middleton is, and I thought I would get a little bit more of context. If you are familiar with New York City, you can see it here on the map, and Washington, D.C. is just south of there. And then the red dot that you see is where Middleton is, next to the state capital of Madison in Wisconsin. And just to put us in a little bit of context as the world goes, so that you would understand what part of the United States we're in. It is relatively cold compared to your climate. We have snow for the months of November through March. So for quite a bit of our winter, there's snow on the ground, and that was something that both Woon and Ambika got to see when they were here visiting. So I will now go to my PowerPoint presentation and give you a few different examples of the kinds of things that I saw that you were putting in the word diagram about really working from the ground up on putting democracy in action. In the United States, we have, and can you see my slides now? Collaborative energy planning. Okay, great. In the United States, municipal governments have the powers that are allowed to them by the federal and state governments. So what that means is that we have some discretion at the local level, and we're able to, and this is where most residents are empowered, is with their local government. In small d democracy, there's a city council of 9 people, including the mayor. The mayor, they're all part-time positions in Middleton, and they work with a full-time administrator like myself, who manages the city staff, like Rusydie was mentioning. So one of the projects I thought would be of interest is how we are working with other local governments in our area, collaborating on energy planning. And we all know that the climate crisis is very significant and having an effect all over the world on the way we live. And one of the things that we've really been working on, and it has been a many-year process through a sustainability committee of volunteers working and making recommendations to the elected officials in Middleton. One of the projects that we are working on with other communities is collaboration on energy planning. And here are some of our goals in doing so. We are working to learn from one another and to work to be inspired by and to collaborate on energy saving means with other
Mike,
local.
sorry
Yes.
for interrupting. If I could get you to full screen your presentation, that would be great.
Oh, is it not full screen?
Oh, no, it's not.
Okay, let me try that again then.
You could,
Is that better?
it's shared the screen, but you need to click on the projector icon on the bottom right. Do you see that? Next to the minus.
Next to the minus.
At the bottom right most of your screen.
Is that better?
Next to the minus, you will see the projector icon, right?
Oh, I
Yes.
see. Okay, does that do it for you?
Beautiful. Thank you, Mike.
Okay.
Sorry for interrupting.
All
Please
right.
continue.
No problem. Thank you for correcting that. I appreciate that. All right. So these are some of the goals that we're working on with other communities. And these are the communities, their populations, and our total carbon emissions for each. These are some of the questions that we're asking and putting this together. And again, these are both volunteers and people who work with other municipalities in the broader area. How do you track your energy? And how can we benchmark and compare to other communities? So it takes a great deal of work from the bottom up to do this and to learn from one another. And then we seek potential energy cost reductions and examine how we can do that. Some of that is through savings in our fleet, our vehicles that we operate, our streetlights, our building efficiency. This is an example of a solar farm. We have a solar farm at our municipal airport in Middleton. And this is a bit of the timeline of what we've worked on as a community. And this is a very much a ground up approach. We instituted a sustainability committee in 2009, developed a sustainable city plan in 2010. In 2016, we had a climate referendum, which was approved by over 80% of our voters, by which in 2035, the city itself would have 100% renewable energy for its own uses and for the community 100% by 2050. That climate referendum took citizen groups who went out and educated voters so that they would know what it was that we were seeking to do. And it was very much a grassroots type of referendum from the bottom up. And we're now seeking to have a new iteration of that sustainable city plan as well, looking at solar installations, battery storage, and a LEED certificate for cities certification. That's with electrical vehicles as well. Our energy, and there's some snow for you. For those of you in Malaysia who haven't seen snow in person, we have quite a bit of it. We have falling leaves this time of the year, making way for the winter to come. So these are some of our goals in our energy resolution, as I was mentioning earlier, where we will be prioritizing local and microgrid-based renewable energy projects over the next several years. We're working together on a grant from the federal government that enables us to do quite a bit of work and innovation in this arena. And this is just an example of the energy use that we have looked at by our various departments of the city. And you can see that our well and pumps is a big part of it for our water utility and our sanitary sewer. Fire and police and EMS public safety services are also a big energy user, our fleet and our street lights. Solar is a big part of our work on renewable energy in this community. Our fleet conversion to electric vehicles, street light conversion to LED bulbs, and a great deal of other work as well. So some of the lessons learned and challenges that we've had from this is relationship building with other governments. Oftentimes there can be an incentive to go it alone and for each community and to be prideful and independent. However, what we're trying to do is not only be prideful and independent, but to collaborate and build relationships, learn from one another in other local governments and from volunteers who are working and have specific knowledge, scientific knowledge that can help. So that's what I have about that project. I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mike. We have a question from Amalina here. You mentioned that a lot of the policy was bottoms up from grassroots advocacy. Is there a history as to why the community has a higher incentive for sustainability?
We live in an area that has a lot of natural blessings. One of those is water. We have a great deal of lakes in this part of the country. And if you recall that slide I showed, the Great Lakes are in the upper part of the United States. And the Mississippi River flows adjacent to Wisconsin. So there's a lot of natural beauty and interest in preserving that, preserving what we have, the water quality, which is always a constant battle. So I think that strong interest in environmental sustainability is prevalent in our particular part of the country. And people want to preserve it, and they believe very strongly in saving the world from climate change.
Great. I hope that answers your question, Amelina. I have a question of my own. I was wondering how that played into the civic engagement aspect of things, which basically is how were you able to lobby and gain the people's trust about what you were proposing at the time?
When we have various projects that take place, we have public meetings, and when you hear from your citizens that they want to do more, they will come to those public meetings and express it. That leads us to, in this case, we developed a sustainability committee in the year 2009, and those were volunteers who were selected by the mayor and approved by the city council to make recommendations to the elected officials here. So we essentially brought in the people from the ground up to make recommendations and find means by which we could work with the city staff and implement those processes within the city operations, whether it be renewable energy use, making our vehicles more fuel efficient, preserving our creeks and waterbeds, trying to make our water more clean. So there's a great deal of energy and effort from volunteer groups who make recommendations to the elected officials while working with full-time people like myself. So that's essentially where the ground up is those people who volunteer for service in local government. They're not paid, but they have these appointments and spend a great deal of their time. They usually work in the private sector or in the public sector elsewhere, and they spend their free time, some of their free time, working for their community.
Thank you for the answer, Mike. From what I gleaned, the avenue to express people's needs is available. I imagine, like town hall gatherings or just an open call for feedback that exists and is prevalent in the society in Middleton?
Yes.
Okay.
And prior to the pandemic, it was in-person meetings. Since the pandemic, we have been largely meeting through Zoom like this, which doesn't have quite the personal connection, but also enables more people to participate while being at home. So we found both pluses and minuses with that, but we still long for that interaction in person.
Yeah, I cannot refute that. Less personable, but you cannot argue the reach that it has. Okay, we have one more question from the audience from Wani. How is Middleton handling renewable or solar energy technology waste, such as used solar panels?
Used solar panels? We really haven't had solar panels in use long enough to recycle them. We have started, let's see, at our airport about 3 or 4 years ago, we put in a solar field, and we have, we work with a private utility company on a community shared solar, so that when those solar panels are installed, you can actually purchase a share of those for energy savings within your household. But none of our solar panels have been recycled yet. But I understand that there is a pretty good market for solar panels. They seem to last for a very long time. There is one component that needs to be changed about every 10 years. We haven't had them in use long enough as a community to have to install a new, I'm forgetting the name of the device, but if that's what your intent is with that question about, do we recycle solar panels? We haven't yet.
Great. And that, I presume the shelf life is a little bit longer than your average canned food.
Yeah, the shelf life, from what I understand from the experts, is 25 to 30 years. Now the technology can change and improve, and that happens more frequently. So the solar panels that we have in place now may be outdated within another 5 to 10 years. So the question would be, do you replace the panels that you have with more, with panels that are even more efficient? And that's a question that we haven't quite faced yet.
I'd love to be with you when you arrive at the answer, Mike. Perhaps we can come back to the session in 10 years and inform everybody what the consensus is. We also have a couple of questions from another one of our audience in Zoom here from Farizan. What are the available types of funding to sustain these efforts? I think he's talking about yours. I can give some parallels afterwards.
There are tax incentives for private entities to install solar panels. Barack Obama was our president for 8 years, and he started with massive tax incentives for private entities that really pushed the market forward in renewable energy, not just for solar panels, but also for geothermal, which is water from underground, heating of water, and very efficient use of geothermal. Hydropower is also, of course, renewable. And LED lighting, which I previously mentioned, which is more energy efficient as well. So there are numerous tax incentives for private entities. For public entities, there are grant programs from the federal government, primarily the national government. And I mentioned the LEED certificate that we're working on together with other communities. We received that grant so that we could be an example for other communities around the country about how to work together for energy savings. So that's primarily where they're coming from, the financial resources. Private sector are tax credits, public sector are grants.
Okay, thank you for that. We have a couple more questions actually. John Paul asks, could you give suggestions on the best approach when dealing with elected officials regarding matters such as the environment? Because from his perspective, in Sarawak, it's not as straightforward as saying, this is needed, we should get it. What do you think?
Well, and it's not that straightforward here either. It takes a long period of time sometimes to have that effective change with your government officials. And here, I think we have the advantage that we have a very progressive community, one that wants to, and I mentioned 82% supporting efforts to remedy climate change at the local level. And many parts of our area, our community, our larger area of Wisconsin are more conservative, and there's more skepticism about renewable energy. But gradually throughout the United States, it's become more marketable, and more companies are adopting renewable energy. So I think one method to do that is by petition of your government. Another is by demonstrating through projects that people do together that show an example to the government leaders of how things can be done more efficiently. We have not-for-profit organizations that are environmental in nature who are able to get donations from people and demonstrate, oftentimes with government grants, sometimes with private donations. And so that's a big part of it. If you don't have available funding, part of it is just doing something on your own. I've read about efforts in Africa because there's so plentiful of sun near the equator, like there is in Malaysia, where renewable energy through solar panels can work. So sometimes it takes a private entity to show the way to the public entities and the government leaders. Government leaders aren't always the most enlightened, and so they need help from the residents, the citizens, showing them how to do it. So we've had some of that here as well, but we also are fortunate that we have a community that values the environment here, and that can't be overstated. enough.
No, it really can't. Thank you, Mike, for chipping in. We have a couple more questions, but I think we'll save it for time later if we have. Perhaps we could move on to the next presentation. Thank you.
Sure. So the next presentation is really a one slide here. And it is about, let's see if I can make it. Can you all read the print on this slide? Okay. So we have a major transportation corridor through the middle of our community, connecting it with the city of Madison, which is our state capital. And it's called University Avenue. The University of Wisconsin is on University Avenue. That's how it got its name. And so you see a number of volunteers who are walking the street corridor to look for various things with land uses in that area. This is an effort that is just getting started, but that has a variety of, we mentioned ad hoc committee members, including elected officials and volunteers who are on different committees. There's a business owner, homeowner, and the corridor walking tour was undertaken recently, and a community survey that used yard signs during our community festival to get the message across about getting input from citizens on what the University Avenue corridor should look like. The surveys and postcards were available here at City Hall, at our senior center and our youth center, and then also through social media. And we've had over 300 responses so far, which for a community of 20,000 is not bad. It's a good start. So that is just the start of a project, and you can see the people gathering in a room, talking about it with all the maps in the background. That's all I have on this particular project. If you'd like to ask any questions about it.
Sure. How did you get that started? Was there the piece of land, or rather the stretch, was that made available? Was the public notified, hey, we're going to do something, or we'd like to offer this space for you to do something?
Yeah, it was identified in our comprehensive plan as a major new initiative for the city. And the comprehensive plan, which is the next project I was going to talk about, had a great deal of public input and commentary over several years. And we realized that the University Avenue corridor was outdated and needed to be redeveloped. We had several storefronts that were empty, and that's part of the outdated part of it. And so we wanted to invigorate that entire area and make it more of a mixed use type of development. That's, when I say mixed use, that is where you combine housing with retail and restaurants instead of having just strip malls of retail and restaurants. You know, you bring the residents together with the retail and the restaurants to create a more dynamic environment. And that's what the University Avenue corridor is looking to create. And what we're trying to do as a city altogether. In the past, American zoning was keeping all of the manufacturing in one location, all of the retail in another location, and all of the residential in yet another location. But what we're trying to do is to, from a transportation planning standpoint, is to have residents who are more readily able by walking to a location to get to their retail, the restaurants, their jobs. And that could either be through walking or bicycle trails, and not as dependent on automobile traffic. So automotive traffic, it creates its own set of policy concerns and questions and safety issues. So we're trying to make it such that you don't have to rely as much on automobiles and wide streets In this case, you see we have a 4-lane street, University Avenue corridor, and it will remain 4 lanes under our traffic modeling scenarios. But how do we make it safer to cross for pedestrians, for children? And all of these are important issues that we're facing with this particular plan.
Okay. Perhaps I can speak on parallel. You were talking about the merging of different businesses or activities rather to create more wholesome environment. From our experience, and then when I say our, I'm talking about HAUS. This is something that we have also tried to apply in our MO, our modus operandi, which is to invigorate and rejuvenate abandoned buildings. Our experience has been more with the private sector, rather. These private buildings, previously our first one was abandoned for about 8 years before we moved in. It was a residential area. And our idea was to have a space where artists from different backgrounds could come and share ideas, but contributing to that zone, that area, we replaced the activities there from -1 to a +1. Previously, it was occupied by drug abusers. And when we took over, we activated that part of a residential area that was previously seen as quite dark and something people would avoid on their walks. Cleaned it up, and we got rid of a bunch of needles in the grass, you know, just your usual drug abuse den cleanup. And then secondly, we moved into another space and we repeated that process. And the third place which we now reside in is in an industrial area. And the kind of activities that we bring are completely different from what this place is meant for, this industrial area. There's a bunch of factories around here. There are migrant workers living around here, but we're doing things more along the arts line. And I see that as a parallel for the marriage of space and the unlikeliness of its purpose outside of zoning. And, you know, it's something that I feel that a lot of communities can learn from, which is to not necessarily stay to their own zone. Mike, would you agree that a zone is more than what it's meant for? Could be more.
Yes, we're looking to, throughout our comprehensive plan, we're looking to have more flexibility in our zoning. You know, I mentioned how things are separated like that. And what you're talking about, Rusydie, is very similar to that, where you're trying to intermix uses, bring people together with businesses, and to do that in a way that brings community benefit. And I applaud your efforts in that regard. That's how many communities throughout the United States have tried to deal with places that have become drug dens, which then become crime dens, and places that would be an eyesore to the rest of the community. So how do you rejuvenate that? And what you said is, you know, go in there, reclaim it, and make it for community uses, and hopefully benefit people who are having some of the problems in our society, helping them to find work. It could be arts, it could be manual labor, it could be community benefited labor. But all of that is for the good. When you retake a place that is underutilized or badly utilized and try to convert it into a positive for the community. So kudos to you for being able to do that in those abandoned buildings.
Thank you, Mike. With the success of the previous experience, the humble successes of our previous experiences, I imagine it would be differently if it would pan out differently if we were dealing with councils and more government bodies. It's quite common fact here in Kuching that there are a lot of abandoned buildings that could be put to better use. And yeah, there's a lot of unparalleled, there's a lot of initiatives to remedy that across the world. Why can't we implement it here? But enough on allow me to read the comment of Farizan. Perhaps Middleton would be open to adopting relevant cities in Sabah or Sarawak as sister city. I think he's talking about your reach through Zoom, Mike. a lot of good exchange can happen, I imagine.
Yes, you know, the old model for sister cities has been to go visit around the world. Of course, there are barriers to that, especially with the pandemic in place and the cost of flying, et cetera. But, you know, one of the silver linings of this pandemic has been connecting ourselves via Zoom and other technologies. And so I do think that the ability to have these kind of relationships internationally is going to increase exponentially over the next several years and make our world a smaller place. I'm talking with you from half a world away, and I think that's just incredible and quite exciting, and we can learn from one another, whether we're traveling internationally or not. And I do love traveling internationally, but it's less accessible for people than this kind of technology bringing us closer together.
I agree with you. Just a little bit less personality, but I agree with you. We have a question. We have a question from Navin. Question to Rusydie: has there been government support for your initiatives? Navin, if you're speaking about HAUS as an entity, not directly, there have been a few government funding availabilities from the government that we've applied for, but it's always been more towards programming and what's that? Yes, sorry, programming. Whereas the needs of HAUS and what we do, although we do engage people through programming, we are reliant somewhat on having the space and having adequate facilities. We did partner with Sarawak Digital Economy Corporation, SDEC, to pull off one of our first digital programs with HAUS, which was an artist residency. And we're very thankful for that, of course. However, we would love to see much more support when it comes to improving facilities of existing grassroots communities here. We're a small town, so we know each other. So I feel that the application should, rather the process of getting there should be a more inviting process to match the close-knitness of our community here in Kuching. Navin, I hope that answers your question. We have another question from John Paul. However, we're on time for this presentation. Can we save your question for later, JP? And I think we'll move on with the next presentation, Mike, if you please.
All right. A big part of our community planning and development is a comprehensive plan that looks at the various land uses of the community. There you can see the lake in the background. Lake Mendota is a large lake. Both the state capital of Madison and Middleton are neighbors on this lake, and we enjoy the benefits of fresh natural water from the lake as well. So we're a low-lying community. That means we can be prone to flooding without good stormwater management. Here are some of the elements of our comprehensive plan. So these are the kind of things we look for in developing policies. And by the way, you know, we had our last comprehensive plan was 2006, and it took us 5 years of citizen input and development of this plan to come up with what we have. These are the elements that are required by state law for the plan: the land use, transportation, housing, economic development, community character, green city, which is the environmental aspects, and governance and partnerships. What I talked about with the first presentation on collaboration on energy conservation was a governance partnership. So these are our values: community, sustainability, equity, health, accessibility, innovation, and resiliency. And we call ourselves the Good Neighbor City in Middleton. We had 8 goals, 45 strategies, and 225 actions developed in our plan. And as you can see, major goals of Green City, preserving, protecting, and enhancing our connections to nature, agriculture, and water resources. We are a small city with surrounded by farm fields on one side and by the state capital of Madison on the other side. So while we're a community of 22,000 people, we're adjacent to the state capital of 250,000 people and several other municipalities in the area. This gives you a little idea of the democracy in action, people gathering to provide public input. So we had 9 public input sessions altogether. Our plan commission, who are volunteers, met and had 28 work sessions attended by the public. We had various committees and commissions of the city. We have about 30 committees altogether that are composed of mostly volunteers working with elected officials to develop policy recommendations. And then we had 3 social media polls, a resident survey, a business survey, and 9 public hearings at which people will let you know what they think and give ideas and examples. And we have a pretty well-educated populace, and so largely they're providing us really good information and guidance. Here are some of the things we looked at in measuring ourselves. How well are we doing on inclusivity and engagement, for example? You can see that at the bottom that excellent is the dark green, good is the slightly less dark green, fair is the yellowish color, and poor is red. So overall, we're doing pretty well. But you can see the strong areas for our community are on parks and recreation and natural environment. Safety as well are probably our 3 greatest strengths, and quality of life is right there overall down at the bottom. Where very few people feel that we're anything but excellent or good. And then we do data to show how we're doing on household income. And that enables us to see how well we're doing on our equity initiatives over time. So the idea is to develop benchmarks to see how we'll improve for successive community plans. So in that column on household income, you can see the distribution of household income throughout the community. Less than $35,000 in annual income is in Middleton. That is somebody with low income and resources. And then on education, you can see the number of residents with bachelor's degrees, some college or associate's degrees, high school, and less than high school. And our racial relations, we are predominantly white Caucasian, about 84%, but we have growing populations of African American, Asian American, and Latinos who are a blend within both the white and the some of the other statistics. Our population projections, you can see how we've grown over the last 50 years and how we're projected to grow through the year 2050. So we do have healthy growth in the community. And then our age distribution. The baby boom generation is that area, like myself, in the 60s and the 70s, and followed by millennials in their 20s and 30s, and not as many in Generation Z, which is largely those who are under the age of 22. So it helps to have these kind of statistics so that we can measure how well we do over time. This map shows our future land use planning. And the green area is our conservancy. The lake is on the east side in blue. And you can see other major green areas that are natural water resources, golf course on the far southwest side of the map, and our business areas outlined in orange, and then a large area that is a lighter color of orange that is our mixed use. And Rusydie, you and I were talking about that earlier. How do we encourage more of that kind of mixed use where the residents have easy accessibility to jobs, restaurants, and activity that's beneficial to them? The yellow areas that you see are the established neighborhoods throughout the community. And here's where we identify economic development opportunities. We own an airport in Middleton, and we're currently undergoing an airport master plan process. We also have what we call economic infill, employment infill, and that's where we have those opportunities for mixed use of housing, retail, and restaurants, business startups, technology companies, and the University Avenue corridor is the area. Let's see, I don't know if you can see me pointing to it or not, but it's the bended area along that major transportation route that goes to the east into Madison. And then we emphasize our green areas, our conservancy, and our waterway corridors where we connect trails from residential areas to mixed use areas and businesses for jobs. So the interconnection is very important to keep our community connected with one another via trails as well as by roads and streets. Many urban areas throughout the world, we see poor people being separated from rich people strategically and by design. We're trying to break through those barriers so that we have people interacting throughout the community and having our natural resources available to everyone. And that's a very important part of our comprehensive planning in interconnecting people of all backgrounds. This shows, I mentioned that we're a low-lying area, and this shows our danger areas for flooding. We had significant floods 3 years ago, and we now are updating our floodplain because identifying a 100-year floodway is not enough. We're trying to identify, due to the effects of climate change, how we can prevent the ravages of flooding in the future by better planning for stormwater management of those areas. And so the areas you see here that are dotted in blue or hash marked in blue are areas that were flooded 3 years ago, and where we're making initiatives to modify our floodplain, to prevent building within those areas to the extent that we can, and to increase the stormwater capacity. And this is a very important part of our comprehensive planning. And then finally, these are the various plans that are part of the comprehensive plan for the community. So we look at our financial plan, our library strategic roadmap, our planning and community development, our bicycle and pedestrian plan. So really our comprehensive plan knits all of these land use plans together along with the financial plan for a 5-year street improvement and other capital improvements. And we're starting on a strategic plan for the community as well. So you hear the word plan come up quite a bit. Plan is code for involving the community in providing input, feedback, and sometimes leadership in creating a better community. Our public lands are one in which people really care and provide that feedback on a regular basis. When we now use a survey company that is located here in Middleton that does digital surveying, and we can reach out to a large number of people outside of public meetings and surveying them. We even survey about what kind of playground equipment you want in your neighborhood. And that's a means by which we get people to participate. If they don't come out to public meetings, they could participate through a survey and let their elected officials know what they would like. So participatory democracy is really important and critical to what we do, and it's valued here too. And I think that's really important. So that concludes the 3 different projects that I had for a presentation. Here's some of the folks who helped to put this together and who you might see on future visits, because I will be retiring in May of next year. But both Abby Attoon and Kelly Hilliard are great young, well, to me, they're young professional women, and they will continue to be working in these areas of our community for a long time to come. I'm hopeful of that. So I'd be happy to take any questions you have or any slides that you'd like to see again.
Thank you very much, Mike. Always interesting to see how a city is planned from behind the scenes, I think. And my biggest takeaway personally is that there's a lot that we can learn, not just methodically, but also how thoughtful each of the components that you're trying to navigate and rectify, or rather improve, are. I have a question about, I would like to ask a question on behalf of Navin, who asks about the public input sessions. Perhaps you could elaborate on it. Is it possible to reach out to members of the public who aren't physically able to be there? And if so, what is the mechanism to collect their consensus?
I think the survey mechanisms are very significant in that way. So we're doing more with surveying now. We have a company that specializes in municipal surveys. And so they're not just like Gallup poll or political polls that you've heard of in the past, but they specialize in working with municipalities like ours. They're actually headquartered right here in Middleton, so it's great to have them as a resource. And they just honored us with a national award for our ability to reach out digitally to our citizens. We conducted the National Business Survey last year and the community survey, reaching out to more people than ever in our community. So that was important last year in particular because we weren't meeting personally because of the pandemic. In the past, though, we've had very vigorous and rigorous debates on a variety of things. And I'm not saying it's easy by any means. One of the things that we're trying to do is to build, rather than outward and gobbling up farmland, valuable farmland and natural resources, we're trying to build more vertically, whether it be for multifamily buildings, or multifamily, including residential and restaurants as well. We see that as higher tax value and lower cost of service in servicing those areas as long as you address the public safety aspects of building more vertically, as opposed to horizontally and spreading out in what we call urban sprawl. So much of the United States was formed by urban sprawl. If you go to Los Angeles, for example, it's a famous example of things just spreading out horizontally and haphazardly, creating traffic and smog and environmental pollution in many parts of the country. So we're trying to build more compact communities that value land more specifically by not utilizing it all for building and saving valuable land for farming, agriculture, and other pursuits, including our enjoyment of the environment. That's a really important part of us being a green city, a sustainable community.
Okay. Another question from Navin. What are your thoughts, Mike, on how we can leverage of some of these models and practices to districts and cities here in Malaysia without understanding too much about how things are run here? Is there a kind of general guide to how things should run?
Oh boy. A general guide is hard to say, but there are certainly examples, like what I provided here today. There are going to be different examples by various communities, but you would see a general pattern. One of those is this comprehensive planning process that I mentioned. That's something in our state of Wisconsin that is embedded in state law. Here are the elements you need to look at. And I'll go back to that slide to show you again what I was speaking.
Sure, and just want to note to the audience, our session will be ending soon. If you have any more questions, perhaps you can leave them in the comments or in the chat box, and we'll get to them in the next 5 minutes. Thank you.
So these elements are what is required by our state law for us to address in a comprehensive planning document. So when you ask about a common example, this would be an example of that. This is something that all communities in Wisconsin are required to do. Other states in the United States would have similar type of laws, but not exactly the same. We have 50 states, and each state is different, and the federal government provides general direction, but allows state governments, and state governments usually allow local governments some latitude and discretion in how they put that together. But this gives you a general example, this table of contents for a comprehensive plan about what is in effect a charter for each community on what you should be examining. And then within that, you have the discretion to decide how you would like to grow as a community. And in some areas, they don't like having vertical building. They want to have more of a suburban style. But we have found that it's better from an economic development standpoint, a cost benefit analysis from tax versus expenses for local government, and providing more affordable housing for people who work in your community. So the retail and restaurant workers are relatively lower paid, and by enabling them to have more affordable housing and living closer to their jobs, you're valuing and improving their lives and ability to interact in the community.
I see. Is there a way for our audience to acquire this guide from you, perhaps the slides at the end of the presentation?
Yes, Navin received those from our planner, Daphne Shu. So you'd be able to look at this at your leisure And if you have further questions for me, at the very tail end, you have my email address, and feel free to pass those questions along. We want to encourage that kind of interaction with us. And through email, we can do it. Through Zoom, we can do it as well. And in effect, be your sister city.
Sure. I wholly welcome that. Just need to get your consent because I believe these statistics would prove valuable in anybody trying to lobby for change without prior to this any case studies on their pitches. So I see your presentation as an outstanding example of that. It's something that could benefit anybody with an idea and a will really to go and approach town hall and, you know, voice certain things and also show your case study as parallel to not only an ideal, but also a successful execution of it. Well done to the team, Mike.
Thank you very much, Rusydie. And you know, I think the examples that you gave of repurposing abandoned buildings, that is a tremendous start, because abandoned buildings are a problem. Like you mentioned the drug problems as well as crime and trash. And you go in there and you clean up the worst areas like that, and that sets a whole new tone for your community. That's where you can, at the ground level, have a major impact on your community by showing the care for it. That's where young leaders, like we have on this call, can really make a valuable difference.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. As I mentioned, happy to be an example of that. But rather, my message ultimately from that is, you know, you don't necessarily need startup capital or you know, funding or whatnot to vast degrees. What you need is a group of people who agree that things need to change, and they communicate with each other, and they find the means to make this happen. And you know, the most important part being walking the talk instead of just having discussions in an echo chamber. It goes towards action. And what I would love to see more is more youth participation in municipalities around Sarawak, around Sabah, in Malaysia even, to solve certain issues, social issues, or environmental issues. Earlier in your presentation, you had a flood plan, and that struck me as extremely relevant here to have, because Malaysia has been dealing with floods for the longest time. Yet somehow every year we still manage to fall into, okay, it's this time of the year, I'm going to have to avoid these roads. Not much change, I feel, has happened here in Kuching with regards to managing our sewage, or rather improving existing flood mitigation systems. Just really hoping for a change there. And I heard recently that Navin brought to my attention, actually, in our chat, that there was also a flood in Sabah. And I have yet to read up on that. But as you can see, as you might be able to tell, that this kind of thoughtfulness and planning on the mitigation side of things is much desired here in East Malaysia. It's usually around problem solving rather than working towards mitigation. And I feel that a lot of lives can be saved, a lot of businesses can be saved, a lot of, you know, connectivity can be maintained if a floodplain map was integrated here, and you know, whatever process it may be to acquire feedback from communities most affected. But yeah,
you know, and this is actually a national initiative in the United States that was started probably about 50 years ago. The Federal Emergency Management Administration, FEMA is for short, instituted requirements for floodplain maps throughout the country, and they required communities to have a 100-year floodplain map. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but a 100-year flood is one that is likely to occur has a 1% chance of occurring. However, what we have seen in the United States due to climate change is that that is way outdated. What we are looking at now is, and you can see outlined in the orange, is our 500-year floodplain and areas of concern for flooding. So a big part of that is mapping it and knowing where it is so that you can work on solutions for those areas. And you know, the thing that we all have in common as humans like to live near water. Is that not true? People really enjoy the recreation of water, the natural heritage that we can enjoy through that, and yet too many people living too close to water becomes a problem. So better managing our water resources is something that we're still struggling with and can vastly improve upon. And one of the things that we've also seen is that from agricultural production, there's a great deal of phosphorus runoff that makes the water less attractive and contaminated. So one of the interesting things with regard to that is that our farmers are now working with the state's Department of Natural Resources to prevent manure from washing into our water bodies. And that's been a historic problem in agricultural areas in the United States. Perhaps it is in Malaysia too, but we are very reliant on cows in our part of the country for dairy products, cheese, milk, and also for beef. And the product of methane gas from cows is both an air quality issue, as well as the manure from cows that spread for fertilization purposes. If that gets into your water, then it contaminates your water, your drinking water, and it creates more need for management of drinking water as well. So I think that's probably an area that we have some commonality as well. You may not have as many cows as we do, but you probably have contamination from other animals, other animal resources, as well as human waste as well.
All right. I believe our manure problems are not as widespread as yours, forgive the pun. But in Kuching, we've been susceptible to urban sprawl. So I guess it's one of the benefits that we don't have to worry about manure washing into the city or other usage. We're approaching the end of our session, Mike. Thank you everybody for spending time here this lovely morning. I'd like to end on a question, and it discusses really the relationship between a municipality and the people that they govern. And it might come to surprise, but there was a bridge that was built in KKCT recently, and that's Kota Kinabalu, that's in Sabah, its capital. However, the local authorities have not done much in encouraging pedestrians to use the bridge, the Sky Bridge. Is there any advice on that point?
Is the bridge just for automotive traffic?
I think it's a pedestrian bridge.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah. Zara has provided a link as well in there. I've had a look through, but I think the bigger picture rather is municipality building something that they probably didn't engage their community in prior to that construction, and then it becoming a white elephant or something that is underutilized in the urban or suburban area. What are your thoughts on that disconnect?
Oh, I see the bridge that you're mentioning here. It actually looks like a pretty cool bridge. Is it? It's not used. Is that the concern?
Her question frames that it's rather not encouraged enough, I guess, by the local municipal to use.
It's too bad. It looks like it could really be effectively used.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was it built by the municipality?
Zara, if you'd like to chime in here, perhaps we could get some direct feedback. I'm not familiar with the project, the city enough to give.
Okay. Well, it does look like it is enabling people to cross over major streets, and that certainly could be a benefit. But if there's a lack of pedestrians, that might be another issue too.
Hi, Mr. Michael. I'm Azara. Okay. I'm not sure if I will make sense, but I'll try my best to deliver my point. The thing is, the bridge itself is not. It's not strategically planned. You might say. I mean, how do I say this? Just below, under the bridge, there is a how do you say that? There is a walkway, and gosh, sorry, my mind is blank, but there is a walkway under the bridge that is sort of like encouraging people to walk there instead of using the bridge. I mean, if the authorities want people to use the bridge, they should just close off what's underneath and encourage the people to use the bridge. But now it's not a lot of people wants to use the bridge because they think by crossing the road, the original way of how they travel to point A, from point A to point B will take a shorter time. Yeah, and there is a lift inside the bridge for people with disabilities, but if you for wheelchair user, you have to take the phone there and call the people working there to ask them to come up and to use the lift. And then my friends went on ground to test it. It is too high. The phone is too high for a wheelchair user to reach it, and it is not. And also, it's not big enough for a mother with a stroller to use it. So my point is that it's not really. It's like they build it just for the sake of building it, for it to be there, and not for people to really use it. Yeah, I hope you understand me.
Yes, I do. Thank you for that explanation. That helps because it looks good, even though it has those deficiencies. I know in the United States, we try to plan for a 36-inch or 3-foot width for accessibility purposes, which is your standard that enables a wheelchair with somebody in it to access. So if it's not wide enough for that, that's a big problem. It looks like the concept was well intended, but the execution perhaps was not so good. In our part of the country, we like these kind of bridges because of the cold weather and snow in the winter that enables people to be connected to various services without going out into the elements. Perhaps in Malaysia, you stay out of the heat with that kind of a bridge and access. So I think the key in this is perhaps they didn't listen to the users of that. What we try to do, we're not always successful at it, is to get people to provide feedback on how they would use a facility. And if you don't have that, if you don't have that kind of feedback, The engineers may, again, be well-intentioned, but the public policy benefit isn't there. And that's a classic example of how planning and engineering need to work better together, and sometimes they don't.
I agree with you, Mike. Thank you, Azara, for elaborating on that. I hope that the future projects in KK or anywhere for that matter are more considerate of public feedback prior to any kind of execution, so that systemic problems like this, which are quite ridiculous if you ask me, can be avoided, and less abandoned and underutilized spaces. Guys, we're approaching the end of our session. We're at the end of our session. Thank you so much for staying on. I guess something that we can glean from today's session is that civic engagement, whether or not it is done on a higher, mid-tier or grassroots level, is important because we live in the same spaces and we live in countries that share policies. And when we engage our civic community, we are making more informed decisions with regards to facility upgrades, with regards to problem solving, with regards to city planning. So a lot of problems I feel that our local places, local cities and states are facing is due to that lack of consideration. So let's consider that. I'll hand it over to you, Navin. Thank you for having me. It's been a lovely session, Mike. I hope to have more of a conversation with you outside of these grounds in the future.
Thank you so much, Rusydie, and thank you so much, Mike, for joining us this evening where you are. I know it's running really late and it's way past your bedtime, but really appreciate your sharing. And I really hope that whoever has joined us in today can see the importance of engaging with your public, with other communities around you to gain consensus in non-political and political activities, right?